Anyway, maybe we'll do some UK politics to start off. What's actually going on right now? I haven't looked at UK politics in like a week. Is there anything? What's on that Dog Politics Joe channel? Yeah, it's all just about grooming gangs, isn't it? Alright, f*** it. Let's hear what they've got to say about grooming gangs.
I think it's okay to ask oneself, where were you and did I do a good enough job knowing what we found in Rotherham? So that's why I suppose really what I've been saying when I've had the chance to do so in the last not even 24 hours, but that I think we've just got to attempt to put sort of children in particular at the heart of any discourse really going forward, and in part for what I'm about to say, I think I'd be very surprised if any public servant at all in the land wouldn't agree with the findings of what it is I'm trying to do. So just to set the context, I'm very conscious this is the Home Affairs Committee, so it's not like I'm appearing in front of people that don't know some things. So if I'm grandmother suck eggs, forgive me. I'm sure you know a great deal about these subjects as others don't. But I think it's important to say that what is called group-based child sexual exploitation, which is quite a mouthful in itself, is thankfully still rare. It may be at the most heinous end of crimes, but we have to get a sense of the proportionality of where it fits in that 100,000 crimes of child abuse that have been reported.
Okay, wow, a bunch of boring caveating. Nobody's listening to the caveating. Everyone just wants to hear how bad Muslims are, okay?
In the last 12 months. I'm fairly sure that it's still happening today.
I say that like kind of jokingly, but seriously, like, literally none of the people that this grooming gang inquiry is for, because, like, it's not actually for protecting kids. I'm sorry, that's like a total bullshit reasoning. We already had an inquiry. There were a bunch of suggestions put forward. Tories did none of them. Labour started doing them. We've already got the inquiry done as far as how do we improve policing and relationships with like social care and stuff like that to make sure that these cases don't go unreported or uninvestigated again. Those suggestions have already been laid out. So this isn't about protecting kids. This is about satisfying a contingent of people who, frankly, I don't think will ever be satisfied. Unless this report comes out saying, yeah, Muslims are predisposed to rape and we should deport them all, they're never going to be happy. That's all they want to hear. So all this endless caveating of, oh, we need to get an idea of the exact scale and report. None of it matters. None of it matters.
I think that we can explain that if necessary later. I think people don't necessarily look hard enough to find these children in particular. I think that the world of crime is quite complicated. We've had, to quote colleagues in the police, they are awash with online harm and online exploitation. We've had sort of the growth in the visibility of county lines and child criminal exploitation at the same time that I don't think child abuse or indeed child sexual exploitation has gone away. And certainly from the evidence that we saw during the audit and the visits that we undertook to some police forces, it is clear that it is still data. The national data on grooming gangs is sound not often accused of being a civil servant, but incomplete and unreliable is what is written here. I would say that's putting it mildly. And I feel very strongly on issues that are as searing as people's race, when actually we know the prejudice and racism that people of colour experience in this country, to not get how you treat that data right, actually I think is a different level of public irresponsibility. Sorry to put it so bluntly, I didn't put it that bluntly yesterday, but I think it's particularly important if you are collecting those sorts of issues to get them 100% right, and if you are not getting them 100% right, please don't use them to justify another position, which is potentially what happened. So, and that may be well-meaning, it may not be well-meaning, but that's how the data has run. And I think the sooner we bring a close to that, and either, my view is collect something or don't collect something, for God's sakes, don't half-collect it. That's a bloody disaster, frankly. And so then, I think it's a matter now of public record, we dug deeper.
Yeah, it's just like, it's so retarded, the whole, like, that there were white girls that were groomed. There were white victims. But it was mainly girls from their own communities. Because those were the ones that they had access to. Those were the ones that were least likely to speak out. Those were the ones that they had power over through connections because knew their parents, knew the foster care people, knew whatever. It simply just is the case that it mainly was in their own communities. It did also happen to white girls, obviously. But people want to act like it's just this invading force of Muslims have come over and have started just, you know, raping and pillaging. It's just not quite. It's just not quite accurate. It's just not quite what happened, is it?
To 3 police force areas where there's a clear high rates of child sexual exploitation offending, and dug deeper into those to see whether they had established the facts and figures, and they had established the facts and figures much more than the national data. That then meant I was somewhat tougher, actually, in the way I've just talked about the national data, because if I know it can be collected in large police forces effectively, why can't I collect that nationally? Just soon it added to the sort of sense, oh dear God, what on earth have you done here? So I think that you know it's clear that if you look at those 3 large police forces and their data, one is historic, to be fair, the other 2 are live, then the disproportionality issue is clear, and obviously they ask for, when they ask for ethnicity, they largely, one stops at Asian, the other stops at Pakistani heritage. And again, I can only feel the pain of those communities to know that it's all bundled together in one big grouping, and how unhelpful that is to the very communities that you are talking about. So again, I think that that's not a great way for public policy to be done. Andy Burnham, quite rightly, in my view, did a bit of what I'm doing, which is he thought...
I would love if Tommy C did like a 2-hour segment about grooming gangs. That'd be fucking awesome.
Stuff is going on in Greater Manchester. I need to be assured, he called them assurance reviews, what's going on in Rochdale, what's going on in Oldham. I need to see what the police are doing, and he'd had actually victims and Maggie Oliver in a big meeting in whatever it's not the town hall, but whatever his, you know, place is in Manchester. And they'd all agreed that, you know, people had to be held to account, we had to find out the truth, we had to find out where decisions made. If you look at the assurance reviews that he had done, that he was so frustrated, and so would I have been, so were the people that did those reviews, that it took years. Nobody shared data. They were all lawyering up to fight over who would share what data. And, you know, I put it in more mild terms in the report, but when it came to report 3, which I think was like 4 or 5 years later, the guys resigned, and the thing was handed over to sort of a statutory body in the National Inspectorate and Ofsted. And so I thought to myself, okay, guys, come on. A, nobody's volunteering to find the truth here, and we owe these victims that. Secondly, you see, you know, extremely important assurance reviews by Greater Manchester Mayor, who's one of the, you know, long-standing mayors, you know, knew what he was doing. He couldn't get to the bottom of it. And then you look at the 50 serious case reviews, and you look at the world of serious case reviews, and you see that, to be honest, Mr. Richards, they do not get to the truth of what happens in these cases. What they do is, you know, has the team around the child operated effectively? Now, that's really important, don't get me wrong, but, you know, part of the team around the child are the perpetrators who spot that the team around the child isn't good enough or can't safeguard that child enough. Do we talk about the predators in any of these serious case reviews? Did we know about these predators? Were we properly safeguarding the children? Sorry, you can tell from my tone, I said to everybody, I'll be really measured, don't worry, I won't get, you know, like that about it. But when you start talking about this, you think, yeah, that's why I want a statutory inquiry, and that's why it has to be national, with strong local, you know, this connection between the local and national. So I know it's not what everybody wanted, but I think it's absolutely the right thing to do. I hope that if anybody has teenage girls and adolescent girls in the room right now, if they disappeared overnight and they switched their Finds a Friend off, you would be beside yourselves. Absolutely beside yourselves. But because we're dealing with kids that haven't come from that, we as a state attempt to have a safety net. And that safety net doesn't see that missing. So even though it's an important thing, and you have missing task force and that sort of, it doesn't grasp the bigger picture. And I think fair play to West Yorkshire Police. They have an analyst, Mr. Smith, I've forgotten his first name, and Paul Smith. And after Rotherham had happened, he, you know, often in public service you find individuals, don't you, and you think, wow. And so he developed what they call an algorithm. I'm not sure it is an algorithm, but let's go there. And essentially what he did was say, if we put together missing more than twice, and put that across, I mean, you'll be aware of this, put it across kids perhaps in children's homes, I think it is, or in child in need, then they put it across whether they'd ever been on the radar of anywhere in the criminal justice system. Hey presto, you have a completely different cohort. And I think that we say as a system, and I include myself in this, missing is really important, but then it really...
Yeah, so they're saying there, like, you know, how many times a kid went missing, and then cross-referencing that with whether they're in foster care and all this shit. Because so much of it was, like, in these heavily Muslim areas, where basically, like, a lot of the local institutions, like foster care homes and shit like that, are just, like, staffed by Muslims who knew other Muslim immigrants in the local area. I mean, I say Muslim, it's Pakistani, okay? Stop saying Muslim, it's Pakistani. That's what we're talking about. Again, Chad said this the other day. It's not really all Muslims. It is specific Muslims from a specific background. It's Pakistani. So they're heavily Pakistani areas, where a lot of the people and stuff of these foster homes knew people in the area, and they were part of this, you know, heavy culture. So they come from a background where age of consent isn't a big thing. And they would just not report stuff. They would just not report. like Keir Starmer always goes on about. He was pushing for mandatory reporting to be brought in. Obviously, that would help a bunch with those sorts of cases because you can then obviously prosecute the people who don't say anything. But it would be like, taxi drivers, kebab shop owners, guys who work corner shops, whatever, flying, these young girls from foster homes or whatever with gifts, picking them up, and then they just don't go back and no one reports anything.
Into a transaction rather than, oh dear God, where is this child? Now, if we had rape laws that meant when said child has gone out all night with said perpetrator and his friends, that we will do them for rape, it changes the conversation of the state, really, because rape is seen as one of the most, quite rightly, terrible things that can happen, and particularly terrible things that can happen to children. So in a way, I'm trying to use the opportunity of this audit to say, how do we reset how we think about children? And it's also why, Dame Karen, I'm so concerned
failure of integration. Yeah, I would agree. I think the issue is that we just ghettoized a bunch of populations that were coming here into super tight-knit, like, enclaves, basically. Where, there's a huge problem of, like, entire areas where not that many people speak English and shit like that, that just creates, like, a rift between, like, national public services and local public services, if you know what I mean.
The whole children's services side of this, in that I think they don't even see those children. So how can you would look at missing, you would look at who's on your child in need, you look at the moment, they just have neglect for most of these kids. I think there's some very profound questions to be asked about what's happening in and around children, of which missing, we call it a red flag. You think some sort of beaming noise is, a beep should go off on my phone when Louise Casey goes missing. I'm sure there's plenty of politicians that wish that was possible. But, it's sort of, and yet it's
really important to collect ethnicity and race data, and you've set out really comprehensively why that's the case. But I just think about other kind of child sexual group exploitation that we've seen. So there's been significant ones in the Catholic Church. Also in my city of Edinburgh, there's been significant challenges in boarding schools. And I just wonder, are there other data points we should be collecting? Religion, for example, would be one. Are there other markers you think, or I just wonder why ethnicity and race have been singled out so specifically? I mean, I understand why, but why not others?
Chapter 4 of the report looks at what we call the nature and characteristics of child-based sexual exploitation. It's not an academic exercise of interest, finding out what it looks like. It's actually for important reasons of understanding offending and being able to, by understanding it better, being able to tackle it better. So there's a whole range of things in that chapter, including ethnicity. Ethnicity stands out as one of the areas where data collection has been really poor, where it's been seen as an optional extra. But there are lots of others in there, and we've spoken about some of them. The vulnerability factors associated with victims, for example, understanding those, like the missing episodes and so on, can be really important.
Yeah, I agree on the mandatory reporting. It's just so obvious that mandatory reporting is like a huge piece of this. And Keir Starmer has always been going on about it, and he gets no credit for it, and the right-wing fucking losers are never gonna see that is the one of the obvious solutions here that needs to be implemented is mandatory reporting, but it's just fucking crazy.
All of the demographic information is important, and we go through it all in that chapter. I would say that applies more broadly to crime in general. It's really important to understand who is being affected by crime and who is committing it, and where there's overrepresentation of certain sections of society, whatever that might be, age, sex, religion, culture, nationality, ethnicity. Those are important things to understand in order to work out how you better protect the victims and prosecute the perpetrators.
And I think the other interesting thing about this, it's interesting as a sort of, been around a long time, is that you don't always have to collect national data. You could actually have done a deep dive. Policy making can be done in many different ways. I think that the issue is that people don't always find looking at ethnicity straightforward in certain circumstances. In some ways, they find it really easy.
Dude, which fucking country is Nicandros from? Which country is he from? Which country is Nicandros from? Because I remember I had an argument with this guy in Discord one time. Where he was saying to me that, what was it? He was complaining about how bad immigration and integration is and whatever shithole fucking Nordic countries from. And I Google it, and they literally have like some integration act that was passed within like the last year or two, where they like force fucking immigrants to learn the language and shit, and make them go to like these job centers and all this shit. And I was like, bro, what the fuck are you complaining about?
To look at it, look at the Metropolitan Police and Black Londoners. So, there's an irony to sometimes we decide to find this data writ large and other times we decide not to. So, I mean, I'd add religion into that as well. You could easily run a deep dive into a set of data to establish all sorts of drivers, but nobody's bothered. Sorry, that's too harsh. Nobody has seen it as a priority. And I think sometimes my main view about these things is that if the good people don't grasp difficult issues. There's plenty of bad people out there that will grasp them for you. So I'm always a believer, no matter who is in power. I've worked for several prime ministers, several different administrations over the years, and my advice to everybody always is get ahead of trouble and grasp it, because you're a good person, and there's plenty of people out there that grasp the bad stuff and make it even worse than it needs to be. I'll come to Bradford in a second. The first one you mentioned was the way we talk about Rochdale. So
You don't need to learn the language and just translate your phone. I guarantee you Tommy C translates on his phone in shops. I guarantee he's got it right. You can just see it so clearly.
Sorry, I may not have made myself clear earlier. So I think Andy Burnham did a good thing in Greater Manchester to say, I'm not happy with what's going on here. He listened to victims. He did talk to the police. He did talk to others.
You can just imagine, he's like looking down, typing into his phone. Like, he's got his, like, you know, neck folds pressed against his chest, like looking down, like, drunk, you know, pressing the phone in a very sort of like ham-fisted way.
And he tried to put in place, he did not try, sorry, that's unfair, he instituted
breathing
assurance
too
reviews,
heavy.
that's what they called them, to try and establish exactly what you're wishing, I think, for Bradford. And two good people did them. One of them, who I know was Commissioner in Rotherham when we were there, and they only got so far, because essentially they couldn't require people to give them information, they couldn't require people to give them appear before them, they couldn't didn't have any ability to do hearings, and as I think we put in the report, it just went on and on and on, and then they did this work, but it took a long time before anybody said, as in the new Chief Constable, who said, yeah, we didn't get this right and we're sorry to victims. And that's why we put it in there to say, even when you have actually the Police Crime Commissioner, which is what the mayor is, where you have a Police Crime Commissioner or a mayor that says, I want this to happen, and he spends money getting it happen, it didn't get him what he wanted, which was accountability on behalf of the victims and the system as what happened. So that's why I, again, just doubling down on that looking at that, interviewing various people, we came to the view that without statutory powers, of Inquiry Act type powers, you're not going to get anywhere. And then I agree that if you, I would say, if you were Bradford, if you were anywhere in my report that we published yesterday, if you were any of the areas that are sort of visible and identifiable, just be ready and be open to the fact that you may be the subject of one of the national inquiries. And I would be surprised if some of the areas that I mentioned, probably including Bradford, would not be subject to being part of a national inquiry. And it's absolutely right that I think members of Parliament, I think victims, I think other people are able to say, we want this to happen here, and that should be balanced out with what I think should be, dare I say, an evidence-based and data-led approach to looking at where you would start and where you would head. So I didn't want Mr Moore today to get into, this is my hit list, let's just use common parlance, or, you know, dare I say, this is where I think you should start, because I don't think that was my job. My job was to establish a different set of facts. Do I think you can look at the audit and make that part of your decision-making process, whoever is going to take that role on? I think I probably would if I was theirs. And I think, and I'm sensing and understanding, having met Fiona and seen her previously on Newsnight, good for them for giving her that voice.
Okay. Wow. We are moving. So what are they saying here?
We've seen the Labour government deny any need for a national inquiry, although they did have launched about 5 local inquiries, and they also launched this audit led by Baroness Casey into, I guess, what the sort of state of group-based child exploitation is like in the UK. And specifically, she was looking at the data that they could gather, but a lot of the data is incomplete. It's very inconsistent. Like, the way that ethnicity is recorded varies massively. And when it is recorded, it's only recorded in about 1/3 of instances of this crime. But what, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, in previous sort of discussions, there's a lot of gets made about a Home Office report in 2020, looking into if there was a correlation between ethnicity.
Oh yeah, so I was talking about this briefly a minute ago. This is the report that I think DZ was looking in Discord.
Propensity for committing this type of crime, and the conclusion of that was the data is not reliable enough for us to be able to draw any kind of conclusion. No one should try and draw a conclusion about this. And with the hindsight of the position we're now in, and in relation to the remarks that, for example, Dominic Cummings has been making recently about, he alleges that civil servants deliberately have tried to cover the sort of scope and scope sort of horror of this, tried to cover it up, is that kind of obscuring of ethnic data. Does that serve a kind of, everyone goes, well, we can't draw any conclusions about sort of propensity for doing this because the data isn't reliable enough. And I think Casey is kind of one of the recommendations is that it sort of has to be mandatory, the reporting of ethnicity, right?
Definitely, because she said the information that they received from 3 of the UK's biggest police forces, including Greater
Thank you,
Manchester,
Keith, for the membership.
did suggest that there was a disproportionate number of male suspects of Asian or Pakistani backgrounds, but she said this was based on local data and there's a lack of comprehensive national data. She actually called it an appalling lack of data on ethnicity and crime, and that this incomplete data was being used to suit each side's own ends, and that this issue had become a political football. And one of the things that she made,
that's just obviously true,
that one of the points she made as to why it was so key to start recording this ethnicity data is because right now this incomplete data is a disservice both to victims and to the law-abiding Asian.
It feels like there was just like some retarded like fucking lib idea at some point where it's like, well, we can't record the data because everyone will become racist. And now the lack of data has made it possibly worse than it would have ever been if we just had good data and did the investigations at the time.
Community. Is that something that you would agree with?
Yeah, I think so. I think like misogyny is universal, right? And I think it's really important when we have conversations about this to acknowledge that. It might present itself in different social, economic, and cultural contexts. It might present itself differently, but it serves, like, you have to appreciate that misogyny sort of transcends like ethnicity, right? And in the same way, when we look at previous sexual abuse scandals in the UK, whether that's in the Catholic Church, whether that's, you know, Jimmy Savile or other VIPs, Boy Scouts, etc., the perpetrators are not racialized in the same way that they are racialized in this instance. No one's going, white British men commit the majority of child sexual abuse. So really, do the white guys have a problem?
Okay,
Have a
oh my
cultural
stupid fucking point, because then you've got, dude, okay. Stupid fucking point. Really silly point, because it's not really, that would be a point of, you would look for the per capita there. You would look for the, proportionally, how much do they commit? And I think you would get a different answer, obviously. Dude, I just can't take it. I can't take it, man. Everyone just is so retarded on this issue. It's so annoying. I actually can't listen to people discuss it. It annoys the fuck out of me.
Church, whether that's, you know, Jimmy Savile or other VIPs, Boy Scouts, etc., the perpetrators are
it's either literally like insane, like Muslims are coming here to rape your kids, or it's, well, you know, everyone's exactly the same. Everyone's exactly the same. Aren't we all just exactly the same? No.
In the same way that they are racialized in this instance. No one's going, white British men commit the majority of child sexual abuse. So really, do white guys have a problem? Do white guys have a cultural problem? No one does that. And so I want to kind of, there's a lot I want to say about this. And primarily for me, I think it's that.
Well, yeah, no, they do have a cultural problem, but it's different cultural problems, right? There's like there's probably a baseline problem, cultural problem with child sexual abuse, where it goes underreported, underinvestigated, all that. And then there's secondary problems, like a cultural problem in Pakistan that then transfers over. You know, there can be layers of cultural problems here, right?
The focus of government, the focus of people talking about this, has to be on the victims first and foremost, right? It has to be on their class background. The reality is that a lot of these girls were poor, working class, vulnerable girls from council estates, and as a result, quite often when they came in and spoke about what was happening to them, whether that was with the police or other people, they weren't believed. In some instances, the police dropped them back to their abusers and said, come back when you're not drunk, type thing. And so it's those left behind women and girls where I think most of our attention and action is needed. Everyone talks about how fear of being accused of racism and political correctness essentially shut down a real conversation about this. But the truth is, nobody in power cared because these girls were poor. I think that's what it is. I think that's certainly a part of it. Both things can be a part of it.
It's all just, guys, it's all just class, okay? It's all just class. Okay.
I think it's a story about class invisibility, and as much as it is about possibly racism and cultural sensitivities. And to your point, I think people have made like a pretty catastrophic mistake in letting the right dominate this issue, because what are we talking about here at the end of the day? Like, fighting child sexual exploitation should be a progressive cause.
It can't possibly be simultaneously a class and visibility issue, while also being a culture issue, while also being a like immigration integration issue. It can't possibly be all of these things at once. It can only be one, and it has to be the one that fits my pre-decided lens the most. Okay.
We're talking about predatory behavior. We're talking about institutional power against some of the most vulnerable people in our society. When you couch it in those terms, how is it anything other than a progressive cause?
The groomers are also working class, yes.
And to your point, I don't think treating certain groups with kid gloves because we're scared of sort of the consequences does no one.
But that is still a class issue. To be fair, that is still class
related.
Essentially,
sort of you're prioritizing the politics of embarrassment over the mass organized rape of children. Like, what purpose does that serve? It's like it doesn't serve anyone or anything. And if it's true that in this
Rupert Lowe is a complete fucking retard, firstly. And it's so funny. The cope is amazing, man. I've seen Sargon started turning on Reform and Farage because Farage is selling out. It's beautiful to see, man. Absolutely beautiful to see. And it just keeps winning for him as well. It benefits Farage when he sells out. And these like hard right-wingers are just like fucking crying and just shitting. Just can't fucking take it that as Farage moves more centre, it works for him.
Of crime that Pakistani men are overrepresented, then we have to understand why. We have to understand why. You know, is it because of power? Is it because of money? Is it because of? I've said this before. I think one of the most obvious common denominators to me is working in the nighttime economy, because it provides access to vulnerable women and girls in states of intoxication, inebriation. It might be working in a takeaway.
Food shops has made like 30
as a taxi driver.
videos.
Is that a common denominator? Do we need to understand why and what that's doing? Is it because of cultural attitudes? You know, and this is the part that obviously people kind of the hairs on the back of their neck stand up and they don't want to talk about, right? Pakistan is ranked 145th out of 146 in the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Index in 2023. There are honour killings in Pakistan. The female literacy rate is about 50%. Like, you can't shy away from those facts. Is it because of something else entirely that all of us are missing in this conversation? I think all of those things are like very important to talk about in this, and the primary one that I would say, Laura.
Okay, you got that. Right at the end, you managed to get there and talk about how, you know, there might be some problems in Pakistan that are causing this.
Listen, I've sort of spoken for about 5 minutes here. Is that misogyny is a universal and it transcends. I've sort of spoken for about 5 minutes here. Is that misogyny is a universal and it transcends just the Pakistani community, and we should be very, very careful about racializing this, because the people that are doing that.
Mrao was watching me on his Switch. Dude, it's so over for that guy. Holy fuck. Mrao broke his PC trying to change his CPU. Dude. Unfortunate situation to be in.